Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Needham Free Public Library. I am Gail Hedges, and on behalf of the Friends of the Needham Public Library, welcome. I am pleased to introduce our guest this afternoon, author Mimi Baird. She will talk about her book titled He Wanted the Moon, about her father, Dr. Perry Baird. Mimi grew up in Chestnut Hill, attended Beaver Country Day, graduated from the Westover School in Middlebury, Connecticut, then Colby-Sawyer College in New Hampshire. So Mimi is a true New Englander, having lived in Rhode Island, Connecticut, Vermont, and now in Westwood, Massachusetts, right next door. This is Mimi's first book. She is in conversation with Friends board member, Faith Chandler, who is a longtime Needham resident. Faith was introduced to Mimi by her friend Gretchen and her husband and Mimi's son, Jake, several years ago, and was struck by Mimi's compelling story. A question and answer period will follow the presentation. It will be about 40 minutes, and then we have books for sale over in the opposite corner. I just want to remind you that our next program will be held on Sunday, January 12th at 2 p.m. We will welcome Pulitzer Prize-winning author Sebastian Smee, who will talk about his book, Paris in Ruins, Love, War, and the Birth of Impressionism, focusing on Berthe Morisset and Edouard Monet. Registration is currently open, so if you are a person who likes to plan ahead, you can sign up at the desk. So I turn this over now to Faith and Mimi.
Welcome, Mimi.
Thank you.
I'm very happy to have you here. I think to set the stage for this story, it would be great if you could read some of your prologue.
Sure.
That would be great.
Sure. It was the spring of 1994 when I returned from work to find the package containing my father's manuscript on my doorstep. I was 56 years old, and I have to tell you that reading this does upset me, and it's just part of the story, so please excuse if I get a little emotional. Let me start again. It was the spring of 1994 when I returned from work to find the package containing my father's manuscript on my doorstep. I was 56 years old, and I'd been waiting for some word for him most of my life. I was a 6-year-old child when he stopped coming home. My mother refused to say where he had gone, except to tell me he was ill and away. The same year of 1994, she filed for a divorce and quickly remarried, closing the chapter of her life that contained my father. I was never taken to visit him growing up. His name was rarely mentioned in our house. Since childhood, I've been informed in fleeting comments that he suffered from manic depression. I had seen him again only once, very briefly, before his death in 1959. The late afternoon light cast long, sharp shadows across my entranceway and the box on the step. For decades, my father's manuscript had been kept in an old briefcase in the garage of a family member in Texas. My father was from Texas. All but forgotten. I only recently learned of its existence. I picked up the carton and carefully brought it inside. I knew so little about my father, Perry Baird, only that he had been a doctor with a successful practice in Boston in his heyday. Yet I could vividly recall his presence in my early years. The gleaming white coat he wore at his offices, the sight of him at the Chestnut Hill train station where my mother took me to greet him, returning from a day's work. After he disappeared, I felt the pain of a child who misses a parent, the feeling that had never completely left me. My hands trembled slightly. I took a knife and made a slit along the packaging tape on the top of the carton. Opening the flaps, I peered inside, glimpsing handwriting on the top sheaf. Cautiously, as if my father's words might bite, I took a piece of paper between my thumb and forefinger. It was creamy and slightly translucent, of the onion skin kind used for making carbon copies in the days of the typewriter. I could see that it was covered with many lines of penciled script. I quickly put the page back and closed the carton. After 50 years of silence, it was going to take me a while to work up the courage to hear from him again.
Thank you for reading that. It's okay. It's okay. Thank you for reading that.
This is just very powerful for me to read. I can read it, but saying it is different.
Yes, yes, I can see that. I will say I was immediately drawn in when I read that. And it seemed as we just saw, there's a lot of feelings of anticipation and hesitation in those feelings. The way you have explained it to me is that there's a lot of signs and coincidences that had led to your journey to find out about your father, Dr. Perry Baird, and eventually discover that he had written a manuscript. Before we dive into when you first began this journey to find out about your father, can you tell us what you remember about your childhood growing up in Chestnut Hill?
Well, some of it's not pleasant, but for me, some of it was wonderful. I remember we belonged to the Brookline Country Club, and I remember walking down those frozen golf greens and skating on the pond with my father. Amazingly enough, my mother couldn't stop my father, but he took me to several medical meetings. Now, in those days, that's pretty risque, but I guess I was well behaved. There was ketchup on the walls of our house, and I often wondered why that was so. I later found out that it was blood. But my father was fun and funny, and we had all sorts of adventures. Coming over here in Dedham, I passed the Powers riding stable, if you all know where that is. It's right near the Dedham Club with the golf course right there. He had 3 horses, and he would often take me over to Powers stable and put me on the horse, and we go riding in the woods. I've written down here that to the detriment of the other family members, he doted on me, and he really gave me love that has lasted a lifetime. So that's about.
That's wonderful. You had some great memories of your father. So when you first heard about your father's work while at Dartmouth-Hitchcock Medical Center in New Hampshire, tell us about that chance meeting that you had with Dr. Tanzer while you were working there.
Well, this is remarkable. If any of you are familiar with Dartmouth College, the hospital used to be in Hanover. And a number of years ago, we moved it over to Lebanon. And we had a grand opening. one of the retired doctors that I worked for was well-known all over the country, and people were coming to celebrate him. He was the first plastic surgeon at Dartmouth-Hitchcock Medical Center. And I want to clarify that we did no cosmetic surgery. This was all reconstructive surgery, especially with the children with cleft lip and palate, that kind of thing. It was a wonderful place to work. Well, I wanted to, give a donation, but I didn't want my co-workers to feel that they had to do the same thing, because there was a variety of economical status on various people, and that would have been impossible. So there's a plaque there to this day that says anonymous. So the head of the department came up to me with all these important people that were standing around and said, "Now, Mimi, Dr. Tanzer is so proud of you, and he likes you so much, and would you please tell him that you're anonymous?" So that sounds funny. I stewed and stewed, and then I looked over, and he was by himself for a split second. So I went over, and it's just such a dignified doctor, and I said, "Dr. Tanzer," I said, "I'm anonymous." "Well, Mimi, why would you do that?" And I said, "Well, my mother and I always gave and supported medical initiatives. And certainly this is as wonderful as one I have seen lately. And my last name at that time was different." So he said, well, who was your father?" And I said, "Well, Perry Baird." He said, "Oh, my goodness." He and I were a class apart at Harvard Medical School, and we used to go to lectures together. And we had a grand time together. Well, that
That's
changed.
where it started.
That's right.
Can you tell us what happened next with your journey?
Well, see, I've been married several times, and I was about to go through another divorce, and I thought, I think there's a message here. I need to find out about my father. I've been looking for him in other people, and of course you can never do that. Sorry, hon. It's fact of life. So I made a resolution right there. So what I did was, on the weekends, I was able to locate some of my father's colleagues who were still alive, and I went down to the Boston area, and I interviewed them, and I learned a tremendous amount. Unfortunately, as you all know, my father had a lobotomy, and so when he came back for his last Harvard Medical School reunion, he was just a shell of who he was before. And it was very hard for most of the fathers of my friends were physicians. And so it was very hard for them to talk to me, but I explained that this was a watershed time in my life, and I really needed to move forward for once and for all. Anyway, I think they realized that I was serious, and I had some wonderful, loving conversations with these doctors, because they remember when he was the real person before he got ill. So that helped me to put some of the pieces of my father's life together. He had been appointed head of dermatology at Harvard, and because the dermatology unit was kind of falling to pieces, and but he started having these cyclical episodes of manic depression, and that was impossible. So these wonderful doctors supported him at the MGH and said, well, Perry, if you open up your own practice and he opened it up on Commonwealth Avenue, we will refer all the dermatology cases to you. And that's what he did. And there was one amazing situation. The king of Saudi Arabia had heard about my father and wanted to come to Boston to see him, but he wanted to bring his harem with him. Did I tell you that? And so the Ritz, which is just around the corner, nixed that, and I don't think he ever made the trip to see my father, but it makes a great story, and it's true.
Tell us about what you uncovered about your father and his career successes after graduating from medical school. You just mentioned that he was a dermatologist, and he was fortunate to have been part of a research team that proved that Addison's disease.
Faith, we can't hear you.
Addison's disease were deficient in cortisone, which then led to a later development of steroid cortisone. What else did you find out about him?
Well, if there are any doctors in the audience, you know that the leading doctors usually pick the cream of the crop to have a fellowship. So my father had 2 fellowships of what you're. One was Walter Buchanan, the famous physiologist whose discovery of the fight and flight syndrome is one of the basic ingredients of the human person. And then the other one was Fuller Albright, who Faith was talking about, who my father did research, initial research on Cortin, which is now cortisone, but that became one of the treatments for Addison's disease. And so my father was so fortunate in that stage of his development of his career to be associated with some of the top people in medicine in our country at that time.
It's amazing what you've uncovered from all of your research. But I'm interested in finding about that extraordinary moment, the doorknob moment that occurred while you were attending a conference.
Yeah.
Visiting your uncle.
Yeah, I had a wonderful psychologist that advised me and helped me as I was putting this book, putting the book together when I decided to do that. And she always told me about the doorknob moment when her patients or clients, the most important thing that they wanted to talk about, and their 45 minutes is almost over, and it's time for them to leave, they bring up the most important thing, and time's up. And she called that the doorknob moment. So it turns out that after I had talked with Dr. Tanzer and decided to do this, it turned out that plastic surgery was having their meeting there every 5 years. They have a big meeting, and it was in Dallas, Texas, where my father was from. Now, how amazing is that? So, of course, I went. The first thing I did when I checked into my hotel was to get down the phone book, and my uncle was still alive. I knew that. His name was Philip. I called him Uncle Philip. There were 3 Uncle Philips in the phone book. So I called number 1, not him. Number 2, not him. And of course, number 3 was him. And so what we did was we got together for breakfast the next day before some of my meetings. And then he let off some steam and said that my mother had deserted my father. And then I pointed out that my wealthy aunt, whose husband was head of Magnolia, which merged with Mobil, that we paid for a lot of my father's bills at private institutions like McLean. So we sort of, we hashed things out, and we were buddies after that. So I walked him out. He was a tennis coach, and I walked him out to his car. His car was full of yellow tennis balls. I couldn't believe it, and put his hand on the door and said, "By the way, your father wrote a manuscript. By the way." So I never went, and then he clarified that by saying that his young son had it. So nobody else in the family would take it after my father had died, because it was almost, and this is the problem with stigma in mental illness, is some people think that it's catching, and it's not. It is hereditary, but you can't just catch it from somebody. So I spent my evenings talking with with this newfound, actually he was my cousin. And you remember meeting him, Jay. The two of you had some family resemblance. It was truly amazing. So anyway, it was agreed that they would Xerox a copy for themselves. But you've got to remember, these pieces of paper there were 1,100 pieces of that onion skin paper, and they were all out of order. And there was no way that they could put that together, because they didn't know the history. So of course that's what I did. But anyway, and then we come to that portion of the book that I got teary on, of when that arrived.
Yeah. I mean, once it was in your hands, you actually had it, and you finally went back and you looked at it. How did you feel about that? Did you know at that point you were going to write a book?
No, I had no idea. You've got to remember, this was a treasure hunt. Everything on those pieces of paper, once I got them organized, taught me about my father. That's where I learned about him. No, it was all, I never even thought of that. However, I knew from working at the hospital how to order medical records, and this is before HIPAA. And you all are familiar with HIPAA. And, that's President Kennedy, it was under his administration. HIPAA means that you can't get medical records if somebody is mentally ill, is alcoholic, or is addicted to drugs. So I had all these incredible medical records, and I would make notes at work. So I thought, okay, the Apple computer came up. So I thought, well, maybe I should put all this information I have on Post-its into the Apple computer. So I learned how to use the Apple computer. Then I organized it. And all of a sudden, the book was just writing itself. I didn't intend to do that. It was just a process.
Yeah. So one of the things that struck me while reading this book was your father's notes that appeared to be so clear and so lucid, and his writing was so coherent, which struck me as amazing based on what his condition was. He theorized that it was a chemical imbalance that he actually had in his writings. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, he didn't do that till later, but that's the general gist. My father was gifted, which a lot of people that have bipolar, they call it bipolar disease now. He was a beautiful writer. And so this writing, I think, helped him to focus on being in this institution. This was in Westboro. And, you know, he escaped a couple of times and then came back. But before that incarceration in Westboro, when he was at McLean, he was a patient at McLean, and all his colleagues made the people in McLean release him from McLean. And then he was putting together what he had learned from working with Walter Buchanan and Fuller Albright. And he asked the doctors at McLean, was it okay if he came and drew blood from manic patients? And then you see he injected that into rabbits and rats. And he was, you know, I'm proud to say that his work was actually published. And you know, doctors, it's, you know, publish or perish. It's important for doctors to publish their work and what they've learned. It keeps them being doctors, actually. So his was published in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease. And then he ratcheted it down, and he was not able to, I'm going to read through this, 264. He was never able to finish his experiments. And if he had, we would have known much more about mental disease earlier than we did. Dr. John Cade, an Australian, came up with the same idea that my father did. And he's the and we researched this, that there was no plagiarism or anything. It was just he had the same idea as my father. He just came at it from a different direction. But I was just going to read a couple of things from the discussion of part of this article that was actually published. These experiments have provided biological evidence that the blood of manic patients may differ from the blood of healthy subjects. And then in the next paragraph, which bodes badly for my father, this paper is preliminary in nature, but is published at this time because of the necessity to postpone further experiments for an indefinite and uncertain period of time.
Wow.
And that's when he faded into the mental health system and the lobotomy.
So how has publishing this story affected you? I know you've said you felt such a strong connection to him throughout this whole journey with your father, that you said when you touched the onion paper he wrote on and the lead came away in your hands, you felt...
This was an amazing day. The day that I was dealing with I had and still have a wonderful agent in New York, and we were dealing with Crown Publishing, which is the medical arm of Random House, Penguin House. We were dealing with them on the telephone to make a contract at the same time that Sandy Hook was happening. I had to turn off Sandy Hook. As horrible as it was, this was my father's time. If his book and his manuscript can be published by a reputable Random House, Crown Publishing. It was just the dream come true. So 6 o'clock news comes along. We struck a deal. It was sold to Crown. And I sat down to watch the PBS News. And I had some of my father's papers in my hand. And I looked at this horrible thing that happened in Sandy Hook. And I thought, well, maybe my father's work through this, getting this book published, will help some people so these things don't have to happen. I'm sure you all remember that. That's still lingering in
Yes.
our fabric of our nation.
Yeah. So what kept you going through all these years? I mean, it was about a 20-year journey to gather all the information and do all your research. What kept you going?
Oh, there's the map. Oh, great. Oh, that was easy. If you spent your whole life wanting to know something about a parent, you're going to do it. Here, look, it's not finished yet.
Yeah.
With still the things that, I'll share with you all. It's still going on. Yeah, no, it's a powerful thing.
Yeah.
Especially since his objective, and he says it many times in the manuscript, I'm writing this to defray stigma of mental illness. Boom. That's the goal. That's the goal that you have to successfully manage as best you can.
Yes. So what has the reaction from the medical community been? I understand it's being digitized or has been digitized and is currently in the Harvard Medical School Countway Library. What do you hope for the future of this manuscript?
Well, the medical world they've only recently been aware of me because of Dr. Cade coming up with the same philosophy. They were able to use lithium, so that was being taken care of. But a remarkable thing happened. A publishing company will put out books in a busy, like a Barnes and Noble, a busy store, and see what the traffic is for their book that they're about to release. So this happened in Los Angeles. Brian Lord, who is Mr. Hollywood, he runs CAA, which is Creative Arts Agency, the talent representative. He picked it up and he called Brad Pitt, he called Tony Kushner, who I'm sure both of those you're familiar with, and said, this has got to be produced. And so I signed options with Brad Pitt's company first, and then COVID came along, and all the movie theaters closed down. So people were watching streaming on television. So we decided, the heck with a movie. The movie will go back on a shelf. You only go to see a movie several times. So Brad Pitt, Tony Kushner, and I have signed a contract with HBO. And we are about finished. We're going to do 7 episodes.
It's exciting.
What could be better? This will live in perpetuity. Organizations, all types of organizations, when we finish, there's 7, as I said, can borrow those to use in their classroom, whatever. And my son, my daughter will handle it, then the grandchildren and the grandchildren after that. So it will live in perpetuity. So my father's wish has been accomplished through a modern mechanism of streaming. Do you get that?
Yes. So is that what you mean when he said, complete the job the right way? That was his goal, and you feel like you've...
Well, and that was emphasizing, because it really was, I've written this to defray stigma of mental illness, and doing it the right way is reinforcing that and saying, you got to do it. And I would consider this, when I see that first episode on television, I'll know we did it.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's coming
Right.
along. It's coming along.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're familiar with these two. I mean, somebody from Chestnut Hill working in Hollywood's pretty scary. And I've learned so much, and it's wonderful, and they love
Yeah.
my father. So.
Yes. So how do your family members feel about you writing the book and your journey over the last 20 years?
Well, since I was told virtually nothing about my mother, not my father, by my mother, I would tell Jake and Meg whenever I learned something, I would tell them about it. And we all now know that mental illness is hereditary. We have it in spades in all parts of our various family members, here, there, and everywhere. And so now I've lost my thought.
No, just, you were telling us how your family felt about it.
Oh, family.
And how- yeah.
So now, my daughter and my son were just starting their lives with their families. So I would give them just enough. I mean, I never kept anything from them, but they were raising their family. But what I was giving them was information so they could be on the watch for their family members if there was anything that we needed to pick up on. We now know medication is out there that helps people with mental imbalance. So it was that type of information, right, hon? Yeah.
And the last question is, what advice would you have for others that want to research their family history?
Well, from personal experience, when I first started giving talks, I would, and we couldn't do it here today, but I would always say, okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
This time together, talking about He Wanted the Moon, is confidential. And we don't say anything to anybody else after this session is over. Because what happened is a lot of people that would come to my talks would then suddenly feel comfortable in talking about their own thing. And then they could go home and maybe start working on trying to figure out problems in their own family. So I couldn't emphasize more that if you sense, and I think we all do, that there was something in your family or family associates that you don't know about, you got to find out. Because when you pass, you'll be a lot happier having done that. If you understand what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Welcome.
Is there anything else you want to add? No, you can. You can. I was going to open up the floor to questions. If anybody has any questions for Mimi.
There's Ford.
Yes, I think I'm down now.
Okay.
I've known Mimi for a long time. Mimi, when I read the book, which I read in 2 days, which is very unusual for me, but it's an amazing book, it talked about the treatment. Your father talked about the treatment in his papers that he went through, which is sort of cruel and unusual punishment. It almost was like you're a prisoner of war, what happened back in World War II and in Vietnam. it was awful treatment. When did that all change? Because I think
Well-
we learned that tying somebody up and pouring water all over them was not the way to treat them.
Okay, now there are reasons for that. That was a great question. It was World War II. All the good doctors were abroad. Doctors in their operating rooms, in their offices, are the king bees. What they say goes. Nurses hop to whenever the doctor said, I need this, that, bring this person in, whatever. My father, there in Westboro, the quality of the head doctors and the quality of the nurses was poor. And here, they had a doctor who they could boss around instead of being bossed around. And I don't mean to be flip about that. But, so some of the things that my father experienced, there was just no light, nobody was checking in on it. The staff that were taking care of him didn't care because the roles were reversed, if you see what I'm saying. Does that make sense? It was role reversal. And I've been there. I went to Westboro before it's now crumbled and been taken down. But I saw, reading the book, I saw the tubs for the cold baths. I saw all the places. And I also saw, this is going to sound strange, but I also saw a ghost. With the slippers and the robes that they wore. And I saw a ghost go down the stairs. And I got in my car and left. But that was all the power of what I was experiencing. I mean, you just think I was in these rooms where all these things went on. And it was the only thing they were left to do what they wanted because they were the boss. And some of these things were, certainly outlawed, definitely. You're only allowed to do for instance, a lobotomy. My father had 32 ECTs, which didn't work, and so they felt they could do a lobotomy. And lobotomies are, as you know, are outlawed now. And the only reason that you would do a lobotomy is if you were, like, say, in an automobile accident and they needed to get into this part of your head and get things straightened out. But lobotomies are, an accident to your head, in other words.
When was the last time you saw your father? How old were you, and what do you remember? And what was told you after that when you never saw him again?
Well, that was after he'd had his lobotomy. He came to Boston for a Harvard Medical School reunion. And he stayed up the street from where I lived with another doctor. And so he came down, walked down the street, and my mother let him in. And I took him up to my room, how we were at that age, and showed him all my little treasures in my room. And then he left, and that was in 59? No, I can't remember when it was, but that was the last. I was still in. I was at Beaver Country Day School. We lived right across the street from Beaver Country Day School. So I was in the probably the 8th, 9th grade. Now what happened was he came back the next day to see me. My mother and stepfather and sister stayed away, and because my father only wanted to see me. But he had been drinking, and my mother wouldn't let him in. So that's that scene in the book where I'm upstairs looking at him because I was on the second floor. sitting on the curb with his head in his hands, and that was the last. That was the last. And then he had the seizure in the tub and drowned in 1959.
I have two questions. One, perhaps trivial. We're seeing these slides, and I can connect the slides to your story, except for the one of Omar Khayyam.
Oh,
What was that about?
oh, that was one of the things my father loved to do with me, besides skating at the country club, was he would sit me in his lap and he would read that, what is that book? The
Rubicon, yeah.
Rubicon, yeah. He would read all these stanzas. And that was one of the few intimate times that I had with him, was reading that. And so if you read that stanza, I picked that because it talked about madness and drink and all
I
of
see.
that it kind of reflected the situation.
The other question I have is about your title. What does that refer to?
Okay, there's another story. One of the people that I interviewed was my neighbor that I lived next to when my father was still here, Mrs. Fenno. And I called and asked her if I could come. And she's a very proper lady. So we sat in her beautiful living room full of chintz and antiques and everything. And so she rode with my father. My father had not one horse, not two horses, but 3 horses, of course, doing things in excess. And all of a sudden, she looked at me and she realized, oh my gosh, Mimi, that's Perry's daughter. I shouldn't be telling her these things. Oh no, what am I going to do? So she just said, don't worry about your father. He just wanted the moon. And she kind of just brushed over that. And then I quietly dismissed myself, got in my car and wrote that down. Because it seemed to encapsulate totally, spontaneously from Mrs. Fenno. So that's where, and my wonderful screenwriter, Tony Kushner, calls it Moon. So we talk, I don't know what it will be when we, get those HBO episodes up there, what they will decide, but right now we call it Moon.
Any other questions? I have one. Any other over on the other side? Yeah, sure. Nope.
Can everyone hear me, or do I need the microphone? No? Okay. What? Hi. Hi, Mimi. No, this is really loud.
Hi, dear.
Okay, I'm going to stand up. Can everyone hear me? Okay, thanks.
Yeah, but tell people who you are.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Ashley Robertson McClary, and I'm Jake and Gretchen's first cousin. And I've known Mimi, my whole life, but we got reconnected.
I'm your aunt.
You're my aunt, and we got reconnected, basically just meeting and then seeing you after so long, and then
We did
the
a book review.
I did a book club, and she spoke at my book club. It was COVID, so it was virtual. It was a Zoom, and if you didn't read the book, you really shouldn't have been at the book club. But I'm doing book club in January with a different group with your book.
Oh, good.
Again.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
So my question, or comment and question, I think a blessing in disguise is that it's a mini-series, because I think you'll get so much more out of it than
Agree.
a movie. It's going to be probably 14 hours as opposed to 2, and they'll be able to really explore. That's just a comment I thought.
No, I
that'd be
agree.
good.
I agree.
So my question is this. The couple that he helped him after he crawled through the night and went to that farmhouse, and
Yes.
then
Yeah.
that couple who helped him, have you ever gone to meet them? I was curious if you had ever.
I'm sure they're deceased.
Well, no, back, way back
Oh, no,
when.
no.
I was just curious about that. No,
No, my thinking hadn't, I never thought of that. Never crossed my mind.
because they were so incredible to him, to help him,
Yeah, they got him back. They got him back to Texas, but then he came back here and slid into the system of mental health institutions.
My question is about the publishing of the story. We have a lot of, I'm sure we have would-be writers, people with their own stories here. How did you approach finding a publisher? That's not an easy thing to do, and you have a first-rate publisher publishing this book.
Here again, it's magic. It really is. I was on the board of an organization, well, Calvin Coolidge. Calvin Coolidge was born in Vermont, and I live just up the road a piece from him. And I got off the board so I could start this writing. And the woman who took my place called me to ask me a Coolidge question, which I answered. And then she said, well, Mimi, what are you doing? And I told her, and she said, send me your work immediately.
Wow.
Because she had a lot of fellowships of people helping her write books. She wrote a book on the Great Depression. Name is Amity Schlaze. And so lo and behold, this lovely lady, Carol Mann, who's well known as a terrific, and it was a lot of her work that helped me with the movie. Amity played squash with, and so she told Carol Mann about my work, and she said, send it to me immediately. Now, publishing companies have certain agents that they always call and say, do you have anything new?
Right.
So lo and behold, Crown called, Dominica Aliotto called and said, do you have anything? And Carol said, yes, this amazing, at that point the book was, poorly written, because I'm not a writer myself. But so it was through a friend of a friend of a friend, and she called
amazing.
and they said yes, they loved it. I went down to New York, met with Crown, and the rest is history.
Rest is
but
history.
it's all coincidence and talking to a friend.
And did it come out in hardcover and then in paper?
Yes.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, this is the
We have the paper here, yeah.
that I read from. That's the
And it's been
hardcover.
also published in 7 countries?
Yeah.
The book,
Other languages, probably.
Other language-
yeah.
Yes. Now, you always hear about somebody, wonderful writer being published in 32 other language. I have 7. It's pretty good. This bookstore called Beijing Land of Wisdom Books, India, in Canada. It's a Canada, Kannada region of India. France. France is going to show, when we were doing a movie, they were going to show the movie in 200 theaters in Paris, Belgium, South Korea, Australia, and the Netherlands.
Wow,
That's pretty good.
that's amazing. Pretty good. Any other questions? Thank you.
well, Mimi, I want to thank you so much for coming and talking to
Well, it was a
us.
pleasure, and I'm sorry for my emotion. I should have brought that up sooner. It hasn't happened in a long time.